evangelicals, I want to do a little bit on why it's important for evangelicals to be understood as not being homophobic.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so there's kind of a double negative in there, right? I was at a
Yes.
conference last week, and it was people who are interested in trying to live a Christian life in the world that's much more engaged and beneficial to others.
Mm-hmm.
And these were evangelical types. And the folks that we had on the show a couple weeks ago, the Missio Alliance people, David Fitch and Jeff
Oh,
Holzclaw, we interviewed that
okay.
book. So I went to the conference that they were part of.
Mm-hmm.
In Washington, D.C. So lots of friends there. I know lots of people there. And many of the folks there are from evangelical traditions.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the big questions for them that they're facing, like everybody, they're facing a common issue, is how does a Christian person engaged with everyone in the world, at varieties of different levels, how do we address the issue of sexuality and particularly homosexuality?
Mm-hmm.
How does one talk about that? And for evangelicals, very many of them want to grant an authority to the Bible that they feel keeps them from holding opinions or theologies or implications that would be different from what the Bible says.
Mm-hmm.
So they want the Bible to be important and meaningful and instructive and authoritative, and therefore it gets the final word, not their own conclusions and opinions, right?
Right.
And then, they'll have to then decide on which topics do they do that,
Right.
Because there's going to be some that they're going to tend to say, no, I know the Bible says that, but then it kind of doesn't say that anymore, so I don't hold to that. Some of your Levitical laws and some of these things, right? Okay, so they're at this meeting, and people are talking about how do you live Christianly in the world, and it keeps coming up, this issue of homosexuality, because it's a big cultural issue. It's a big personal issue. You can't get around it, right? So they're trying to say, how can we address it? And what I found interesting was at this event, I wasn't hearing people primarily arguing for or against homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
I primarily heard people arguing that I'm not homophobic if I think homosexuality is not God's best for humankind.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different argument.
Yes, it is.
So not agree with me about homosexuality, but don't call me a homophobe if I disagree with you on that topic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that is such an interesting place to have the conversation, because many people who hold views that are similar to mine that would say, no, I think that a homosexual person can live a sexually congruent life with God and with one another, and that it doesn't disqualify someone from being whole sexually. People who hold the view that I hold very often say to people who hold a view that would say that it's
homophobic.
That
They're
look,
afraid.
that there's a heavy critique that comes down, and I find it really interesting and maybe I was in that place too, right? Because I think about my own thoughts on homosexuality and how they've developed over time, and I think that I may have only had a short period where I felt like people who thought differently of me or differently than me were also thinking badly about me, right? But it was a brief period because I think that argument has sharpened over time as more Christians have come to the conclusions that homosexuality is not a forbidden activity by God on its face. They have also sharpened their critique against people who hold the previous view, right? And so one of the big battles being fought, and I think this is very hard for evangelicals, is they want to say, look, I have this commitment to this other authority. That doesn't mean I'm against homosexual people. So they want to be heard on that topic. Now, I think there's a very good argument to have and discussion to have and ideas to chase out if that's actually true or not, right? Okay, so let's have the discussion.
Right.
Is it possible to be against homosexuality in the way that you are with an authority that you say comes from God, and have that not be a de facto judgment or cultural bias, right? Is that possible? But that's a different conversation than
the other.
Do you think this way about homosexuality or not? And I think that for many evangelicals, they're going to have to start with finding new ways to have the conversation. Am I actually homophobic? Like there was a thing on Colbert the other night.
Oh, really?
That I just saw on someone's blog. So I watched this little clip where he writes a song about because he's playing off of a country music person who wrote a song about basically I'm not a racist, the accidental racist, and he does this song with a rap star and the raps. So anyway, the guy's like, I wear a Leonard Skinner shirt with a flag, with a Confederate flag on it, and so the guy's like, I wear hip hoppy clothes, and that doesn't mean that I'm what you think those things mean or whatever. So Colbert's teasing this out.
Yeah.
Right, it's kind of fascinating. And he writes this little parody of that called the Oopsie Daisy Homophobe or something, right? So guys like Colbert, they're using their humor and their
pushing on it.
Style to basically say, yes, you are. And I know a lot of people love Colbert who also hold that the Bible says that it's not in humankind's best interest for someone to be a homosexual. And so they're like, here it comes again, right? Like, and they want to have a better way to have the conversation without it becoming interpersonal.
Well, I've always thought this from the almost the other side of it as somebody who also agrees that human sexuality and partnerships can be made among genders of any kind of variation and combination. And I've thought that I felt a desire to see more biblical scholars go into the text and do some more careful work to speak to evangelicals, because I think there's been some misunderstandings.
Because you think evangelicals would be helped by having some more biblical support for the other position.
So I've seen it almost from a kind of or recognizing that that's the only way that there's going to be a shifting in that community if you can come at it through the Bible. And so what you're suggesting is kind of the opposite, that if they want to communicate to others what they really think, or they have to come through this text in a way and explain. I think it's a piece of what you're saying.
Yeah.
That that's one of the key tenets of evangelicalism, is this relationship with the Bible, a particular kind of relationship that is different than in mainline communities or.
And interesting, I hear evangelicals say, and at this event I heard it fairly articulately, I may not change my view on what I think the Bible says about this, but that doesn't mean that I am
a homophobe.
X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And that's, and I have thought for a long time, we have to argue the biblical point, but here's why I don't think that anymore. Because I think that's been fully argued. Like, I think those resources are absolutely available.
Some people just don't want them.
So there's a hitch somewhere, and I think one of the hitches is that people are not going to take on a new idea until they're sure that changing from that old idea is not capitulating something else. And this is what I heard kind of in the subtext quite often. Like, it's really not even about homosexuality. I don't want to lose the, then the Bible or the authority, or I don't want to lose my structure of thinking. And so it gets really, I think it gets really interesting and complicated.
It kind of reminds me a little bit of the conversation we had with Jay Baker some time ago when he was expressing, both of you were expressing a sense of sometimes intolerance in certain communities where you were arguing sometimes real liberal Christians are sometimes intolerant of the evolution of thinking that goes on for people who aren't as aligned in that thinking set.
Someone's not going to be comfortable saying, hey, convince me to change my opinion if you actually think so badly of me.
Yes. And so I thought about that a lot, because it happens in all different kinds of communities where you expect somebody, like we just had somebody, I was talking to a friend in our Solomon's Porch community where there's a lot of people who think a lot about nutrition and food, and this poor family is like, I didn't even know what gluten was, and now there's all these people with gluten intolerances and gluten-free, and I'd never had massaged kale salad before, and now I'm trying to learn how to and there's this whole, and it made me realize how it can be so disorientating to step into a community that has whatever given set of ways, and that all of us should try to be mindful of that. and try to remember I don't know, to just try to be helpful, hospitable, generous.
Yeah. And don't call me a homophobe because I disagree with you. It's not a bad place to start, but it's a good argument to have. All right, we're going to come out of this segment before we talk to Shauna Niequist, who's going to be our guest here in a minute, with the poetry of our man Michael Toy.
Oh, jeez.
And as is our
we need new
poetry.
music.
Well, you got to find better poetry.
I did. I actually had a couple ideas.
All right, so here it is. Michael Toy. Michael Toy is our guest poet on the show today, and this is Backwards Poetry, Right Eye by Michael Toy.
Backwards poetry of lines, right eye. Exhaustion to anticipation from journey, their reversing runners. Backwards flying bearings, ball and nails. Pressure and heat of waves, inward everything drawing. Latent lying now, package dangerous. Home carried and lifted, backpack. Unpacked and unsealed, cooker pressure. Backwards time winding, keep to somewhere for looking future better, a begin to play press. An angry man stares at himself in a mirror and decides to forgive instead.
The fine words of Michael Toy. We're going to be back after the break with Shauna Niequist. So if you're watching on the video stream, roll over to the next one. If you're on the audio, roll the next one as well. We'll be back here in just a minute with Shauna Niequist.